Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's Roshan Mohammed Saleh here, the editor of Five Pillars, and this is the Big Picture, your weekly show breaking down the main issues facing the Muslim Ummah. In fact, I don't think I should call it a weekly show anymore because I've been quite naughty, a bit lazy, and I haven't done it every week. So I think I'm going to call it a bi-weekly show from now on because that's my commitment to you, to do this at least once every 2 weeks. And inshallah, if something breaks, if there's an emergency, then we could go live at any time. Now, regular viewers of the show will know that what I normally do is I peg the show to a burning issue, something in the news agenda. But I'm not going to do that this week because this week we're going to do a special show on a topic which I think is not spoken about enough. And I think it has to be right there in the center of the Muslim agenda. And ultimately, what I'm talking about is shrinking spaces. I'm really worried that British Muslims in particular are being marginalized, sidelined, basically kicked out of the mainstream of British life. And there's a concerted attempt to literally marginalize our voices so that we aren't represented in British society. And there's 3 million plus of us in this country. So the fact that we can't have this voice in the mainstream, the fact that we are continually attacked by the media, by policymakers, by think tanks, you know, whether it's Muslim activists or ordinary Muslims in universities or schools, subject to censorship, the prevent strategy, whatever it is, that's a dangerous situation. It's dangerous for communal harmony in this country, and it's also dangerous for British democracy, and it's dangerous for holding power to account because that simply will not happen. So in this episode of The Big Picture, I've got two really fantastic guests coming up, both of them members or representing organizations which are mainstream within the Muslim community, which are grassroots, which have their ears to the ground, yet they are systematically disenfranchised and kicked out of the mainstream of British society and demonized and much more. So I'm gonna get those guests on in a few minutes. You guys always send in lots of comments and we need those comments. Please keep them coming in. I'm gonna have at least 2 or 3 sections, 5-minute sections throughout this show, which inshallah will last about 1 hour, where I'll be devoting to your comments, and me and the guests, we can bounce off your comments, etc., etc. But first, because this is supposed to be a news show, I am going to round up a few of the main stories from the last week that have affected the Muslim Ummah. So let's kick off with this one. So as Londoners will know, that's Regent's Park Mosque, London's main mosque, I would say, perhaps that and East London mosques. So obviously we're in the middle of the coronavirus pandemic. We're in the middle of lockdown. More mosques around England have voluntarily shut their doors amid catastrophic casualty figures from the pandemic. Most mosques in London have closed, including the 2 biggest mosques, Regent's Park Mosque, as you see, and East London Mosque as well. However, most mosques in Birmingham, Manchester, and other areas remain open, but with strict restrictions. And at the moment, of course, government guidelines state that the public can attend places of worship, although people mustn't mingle with anyone outside of their household or support bubble. Okay, let's get on to the next story. So this guy, some of you will recognize him. He's Gotabaya Rajapaksa, the president of Sri Lanka, the right-wing Buddhist nationalist president of Sri Lanka. And the Sri Lankan government has insisted it will continue to cremate all coronavirus victims, effectively rejecting recommendations from its own medical experts to allow Muslims and Christians to bury their dead. The announcement came despite a government-appointed expert committee noting that while it felt cremations were safest, burials could be allowed under strict conditions. The government first banned burials in April amid concerns, which experts say are baseless, by influential Buddhist monks that burying bodies could contaminate groundwater and spread the virus. And the final story from this week is from Palestine. You'll recognize that as the apartheid wall, the separation wall, which eats into the West Bank and steals Palestinian land. And the Israeli human rights group B'Tselem has said that Israel is an apartheid state. We all knew that, but now here is an Israeli human rights group, the biggest Israeli human rights group, saying that, although Israeli human rights group is a bit of an oxymoron, I think. Anyway, B'Tselem said that the Zionist regime seeks to cement the supremacy of one group, Jews, over another, Palestinians. This is an Israeli human rights group saying this, not me. B'Tselem said that the world needed to stop thinking in terms of a democratic Israel and a temporary military occupation of Palestinian areas. Rather, it should view Israel as a regime between the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River, organized under a single principle to implement laws, practices, and state violence designed to cement Jewish supremacy. Okay, well, we all knew that. The Palestinians already knew that. They've been suffering it for, the best part of a century now. Yeah, whenever you or me are called an anti-Semite by the Israel lobby, all we got to do is retweet the B'Tselem article and tell people what the Israelis themselves are saying. Okay, without further ado, we're going to get into today's subject, and we're going to bring in today's first guest, who is Azad Ali. And Azad is the Community Relations Outreach Director for CAGE, I think. Is that your proper title, Azad?
Yeah, that'll do.
Fair enough. Anyway, sorry, I should have started by saying salam alaikum. How you doing, brother?
Alaikum assalam. Alhamdulillah. Jazakallah khair for having me on.
Yeah, how's lockdown going for you, Azad?
Alhamdulillah, it's okay. Everything's online, but alhamdulillah, we're doing okay. Alhamdulillah.
And CAGE's work is continuing. It hasn't hindered your work too much?
I mean, obviously there is an impact, like everyone else. So it's not as normal, but we are still covering a major part of our work, which is cases and helping people. Yeah.
All right, Azad, let's get straight into this. So today's subject is about shrinking spaces for mainstream Muslims in British society. Now, you personally, and CAGE more generally, have literally perhaps been the most targeted Muslim civil society organization over the past decade, I think. I think it's fair enough to say that. Tell me about what you've been through.
Yeah, no, well, I mean, if people Google my name, I'm sure most of it will come up. I've actually been given an honorary Wikipedia page as well, if that's not enough. I mean, essentially, what happened is, if we go back to after 9/11, in particular after 2005, there's been a concerted effort by the right wing to stop voices that were actually focusing on issues that affect all of us as citizens. And one of the reasons why I've particularly been targeted is that I was quite active within government kind of circles, within institutions like the police and others, where we wanted to remain focused on what the issue was, the issue of violence, what causes violence, what its root causes, for example. And, we used to have conversations where senior police officers would acknowledge and would actually say that, because of the Iraq war, this is why it's happening. We saw the videos after 2005. So there was this kind of conversations taking place where actually people were coming to the table with an objective mind. But that obviously did not suit the neoconservative agenda. And so what they started to do is isolate voices, demonize voices. And for me, I mean, they were all kind of very shocked that, who is this guy? How comes he's meeting with all these top people, the Commissioner of Metropolitan Police, et cetera, we need to dig out some dirt on him. So the attack initially came, I think it was the Mail on Sunday, did a spread on me, front page and everything. And essentially what they tried to say is I was calling for the killing of British soldiers in Iraq.
Were you?
No, I wasn't. I actually, I mean, the funny thing, the irony is the whole, basis of that is a quote that I actually quoted from the Irish Times. So the Irish Times quotes Hudhaifa Azam. Azam was the kind of son, his son, yeah. And I just copy it and pasted that quote and said, look, this makes sense. Yeah. Because what he was essentially saying is there's a theater of war and you can't take war out of that theater. So he was saying, like, you shouldn't be creating attacks in the UK and everything else, because that's not a theater of war. So that was the thing. And so they tried to portray that this is what I was doing.
Yeah.
Obviously, at the same time, I was sitting with the police and everything else.
Yeah. They wanted to derail that process, obviously.
Yeah, they wanted to derail.
I mean, Azad, I think we could probably be here for about 2 hours detailing everything that happened to you. We literally could, because I was Googling it a bit earlier on. But if you can be a little bit brief and tell me, with Cage in particular, what's happened to Cage? I mean, off the top of my head, I guess the newspaper articles just constantly attacking Cage, causing them extremists. Your events have been shut down. Venues tend to shut down. When you try to hold an event somewhere, they get shut down. What else?
Yeah, no, this is a regular smearing, demonization that does take place of Cage. Actually, before I do start on the negative, alhamdulillah, we actually won a case against the Times and managed to get compensation and an apology from the Times for smearing us, as terror apologists and things like that. So what really kind of motivates these newspapers that are doing the work of the neoconservative agenda is that they don't like the light being shone on themselves. So obviously, one of the main role of Cage is to hold power to account in particular in terms of the war on terror. So where the British government has been complicit in torture, we're bringing cases, we're filing kind of campaigns and lawsuits and everything else against the government. So obviously this is a problem. So how do you get rid of the problem? Let's smear the people that are bringing it. So we've had our kind of one of our directors, everyone knows, Muazzam Beg, who was imprisoned in Belmarsh, remanded for 8 months for nothing. That they released him and everything else, but the smearing still carries on.
You guys are subject to Schedule 7 stops whenever you travel.
One of our
your finances. I mean, I think they shut down your bank account, right?
Yes, we actually recently, I might as well let everyone know that our last bank account has also been closed recently. So I mean, these disruptive tactics, as it were, are kind of part and parcel of, and it's a tried and tested thing. This you saw this happening with the Black movement in America, where you would have disruption tactics. Sometimes there was actual violence itself. Sometimes it'd be just kind of smearing individuals so that it made it harder for other people to engage. Sometimes it'd be trying to get people sacked. I mean, this is one of the things that happened to me, because when I was being attacked.
You were a civil servant, weren't you?
I was a civil servant. That's right. Yeah. And so what there was a campaign. There were ministers and others that were campaigning, who were with the policy exchange and others that were actually writing letters to the permanent secretary or the cabinet secretary at that time, actually asking, and I've seen these letters asking for me to be sacked.
So who's doing this, Azad? It's you mentioned policy exchange, so it's think tanks. So who else is it? Who's behind these attacks?
Yeah, you have think tanks like Policy Exchange or Henry Jackson Society. Actually, ironically, Henry Jackson Society has recently advertised an event they're doing on Russian black PR. And this is the same Henry Jackson Society that funded and created an organization called Student Rights. I don't know if you recall, who actually did black PR on Muslims in universities, tried to get a lot of the universities, Muslim students, university events shut down, speakers banned and everything else. So, a lot of the thinking and policies do come from think tanks like that. But you also have ministers, you also have politicians that are part and parcel of this. And of course, the media, and it's not all of the media, it's very important to say that, but a few of the media who happen to have
the Telegraph,
they have
and I should remind the viewers that basically Cage is not a group that calls for violence. Yet it's been criminalized effectively, or it's going down that route. I think everyone can understand if you're calling for violence, if you step over that line, then I think any normal person, Muslim or non-Muslim, would say, no, that's not on. But you're not doing that, yet you're still being targeted. And you're being targeted for political dissent, as far as I can see. Let me read you a quote from Sarah Khan, who is the extremism czar. She heads the Commission for Countering Extremism or whatever, which is a government appointed body. She's on 140K a week for 3 days a week. I can't see any tangible evidence of what she's achieved. I'm willing to be proved wrong. She can come on the show and have it out with me if she wants. Sarah Khan recently criticized a book released by Asim Qureshi from Cage, and she criticized Manchester University Press for publishing it. This is what she said. The book, its publication, gave legitimacy to a group that supported convicted terrorists and provided platforms for Al-Qaeda ideologues. Cage's senior leaders have advocated supporting violent jihad overseas. Groups like Cage use the guise of freedom of speech, rule of law, and anti-racism, but it is the Commission's view that when Cage's activism, beliefs, and behaviors are examined closely, these values are in fact a cover to legitimize their divisive activism. Your response, Azad?
Yeah, I mean, it actually beggars belief that a government-funded agency, a Quango, would actually go after a book that has been written by a number of people, edited by our research director, Dr. Asim Qureshi, and actually try to pressure Manchester University Press to actually stop the publication. And it speaks volumes about this notion of freedom of speech, free speech, a tolerant society, debate and discussion. It isn't anything like that. It is about you either behave and accept our way of thinking and our way of doing things, or you shut up shop and go somewhere else. This is the kind of rhetoric that you kind of feel.
Azad, let me, before I've got a few more questions for you, but let's get to some viewers' comments and let's see if we can bounce off a few of these comments. So, people just saying Assalamu alaikum, wa alaikum salam. Salam Dilly. No, it's not Dilly, it's Roshan. It's Roshan. All right, let me get to a few comments. People just saying lots of salams, which I will return, of course. Sincere advice question: what are your thoughts on the Taliban, USA, Afghan administration's recent developments? Maybe we'll skip that for the time being because it's not particularly on the subject. Fuad Ahmed says some Muslims psychologically prefer the margins of society with their outrageous and unachievable demands. Why should a minority of a minority influence British foreign policy towards Palestine, etc.? Azad, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, that comes from a mindset where you actually accept yourself as the other, and that you are a minority, or you don't quite belong here. So no British Muslim I know actually has that position. We're part of this country. We're citizens of this country. Why should our religion or even our skin color have a bearing on our views? And it's actually a red herring, and to suggest that the British foreign policy is only the concern of Muslims. It's not. It's the concerns of a lot of people. A lot of people would recall before the Iraq War, over 2 million people actually marched against it. That's being still to this day the biggest demonstration in this country. And all of that. Yeah, and that's exactly, and totally ignored. And the people who this is really the irony: the people that are elected into parliament are supposed to represent the people, but here we see the will of the people being totally dismissed. And if that's not dictatorship, then what is?
I think, Azad, I think some Muslims also need to get out of this mindset that we're a host community or we're a guest community in this country. Exactly. I think our elders who came here, it's understandable why they might think that way. Foreigners to the country, couldn't speak the language, suffering racism, kept their heads down. They were kind of grateful to be here. But this is like the second, third, fourth generation now. We are citizens of this country. We're not immigrants. We're not refugees. We're citizens of this country. And therefore, we have the same rights as everyone else. That's what to be a citizen means. So I think some Muslims have just got to wise up, smell the coffee, and get out of this colonial mindset that some of them are still in. And it's not just the elder generation, it's younger generations as well. Akshaf says, so is democracy dying? Azad, briefly.
I think democracy has been dead for a very long time. What we have is interests that are in particular pushed by media moguls and others. I don't think the will of the people exists at all.
Muslim says social media is appeasing the right-wing nationalists and Zionist lobby. Freedom of speech is one-sided in our times. I'm one of those ones that didn't really celebrate Donald Trump being kicked off, even though I know he did pass the threshold for inciting violence. But I think that there's a general kind of censorship going on in social media, and it's Donald Trump and Tommy Robinson one day, it'll be Muslims the next. In fact, it already is Muslims, especially Palestinians. Sincere advice, they defeated Soviet. Yeah, let's just move on from that. Two great organizations. Cage didn't have a problem with UK foreign policy when Parliament was discussing to bomb Syria. Azad?
That's not true. I don't know where that came from.
I think you oppose that.
We are opposed to any interference, especially violent interference. Things like war and military interference in any country, let alone Muslim countries.
Azad, let me ask you a few more questions now, because I mean, do you ever get invited on the mainstream media? I used to be on the media quite a lot, didn't you? And like me, and like all our activist friends, we never get invited on anymore. Is it because we were that bad?
No. You know what? The irony was, all of the time they smeared me and everything else, I actually had more media requests. And I think it's backfired. The people who try to actually demonize, I'm just talking about myself in particular, and in Cage, for example, it's backfired. So, for example, the Sun ran that Sarah Khan story. It's a really silly story and everything else. The Times ran it as well. People were running stories about, oh look, Cage is selling merchandise. They're selling caps and hoodies. And jackets, and on the back of that, our sales has increased. So I think look, it's how you deal with these things. Sometimes what happens, and I think, look, for me, the biggest issue about diminishing space, as you mentioned, Muslim spaces in the public, the biggest kind of factor that makes this possible is the Muslims themselves. If we actually stick by each other, so if, for example, Roshan, a article or someone is trying to smear you and everything else, or 5 pillars, if I actually show solidarity to you, to 5 pillars, then it has no effect. It has no impact. And I think this is really, really important. Unfortunately, this is a deliberate tactic to make it harder for Muslims themselves to stay united and stay kind of tight on particular agenda items, if you like. So I think, you're always going to have these attacks. I don't think you can ever stop those, but how you respond is something that's in your control. So what I would say to brothers and sisters that are listening to this, and any time you see an organization being demonized, you should, first of all, offer solidarity to that organization, and then look at how you can help spread the truth about what's going on. A lot of the attacks on Cage has been mainstream media. Millions and millions of people have read articles, have seen newspaper clips and everything else. But, alhamdulillah, we work tirelessly in the community. And through that, there is still a very strong support for Cage out in the community, despite all of this effort. And, our detractors, they know that. The more they attack us, the more popular we become.
Yeah, exactly. And people need to show solidarity. And I would go further. And even if you don't agree 100% with a Muslim organization's political or even religious positions sometimes, as long as they stay obviously within the general framework of Islam, then we shouldn't insist that we agree 100% with what our brothers say. We have to understand that, ikhtilaf and, the adab of that. Let me just read out a few more comments, Azad. Osama says, if you live your life to please Allah, mainstream British life sounds pretty petty and chasing dunya. I personally don't care about any stream or British anything. Akhtar says, whatever Shia had done apart from going after Muslim organizations, I think Akhtar is talking about Sarah Khan of the Commission for Counter-Extremism. And there's an open invitation, by the way. Obviously, she's not here to defend herself, but if she wants to have it out with me, face-to-face debate, then she is more than welcome. I'll give her a platform. Should charities, think tanks, and advocacy groups that follow intolerant ideologies like Islamism, Fuad Ahmed, is that your real name, Fuad Ahmed? You sure you're not Peter Brown or something? Communism and Nazism be tolerated? To what extent? At what cost to societal peace? Usman says, don't you feel like you're fighting and the tide is against you? Matthew says, what PR efforts do organizations like Cage make to make it easier for Muslims to sympathize with them, let alone non-Muslims? Genuine question. Azad?
Yeah, no, that's a very important point, and we do every time we're smeared and everything else. We issue a statement on our social media platforms, on our mailing list, on our website, and everything else, and it's very, very important. I think one of the problems has been is when people and it's changing, when organizations or institutions get attacked in the mainstream media, their usual strategy is actually to bury their head in the sand and hope that it just goes away. It's just one story, let's just leave it. And that's wrong. You got to fight it robustly, and you got to go to the core of the issues. Remember, look, when a masjid is attacked, for example, there's so many masjids that are attacked because this speaker spoke there. Immediately, what happens sometimes is the mosque or the organization will issue a disclaimer. Oh, we didn't know about this speaker. We didn't know. No, you should not do that. The immediate thing you should do is actually stand your ground, okay? Because look, the newspaper is not what comes to pray in your mosque. The newspaper is not your user. The newspaper itself is nothing to you, okay? You have a primary responsibility to the people that you are working for and providing a service for. As long as they're not upset about anything,
yeah,
yeah.
I think some Muslim organizations, I feel they really need to understand who pays their wages, who donates to them. And it's not the Times or the Telegraph or Sarah Khan or Boris Johnson. It's your local community. That's who you should be serving, and no one else.
And this is actually a really good way to minimize the number of attacks, because look, if Five Pillars is attacked all the time, and the people that are attacking it see that every time we attack them, their popularity rises. More people read it, and more people are sharing their articles. Then they're going to stop doing that. And so we got to realize that, this is a way of doing that. You need to respond in the right way. Hiding ourselves away from society isn't going to be the answer.
Azad, any final thoughts? I mean, what do you make of this? I mean, we've talked about the problem and the marginalization. What are the implications for not just the Muslim community, but the wider community? And how do we get to a better place? Because it seems like a bit of a downward spiral at the moment.
Yeah, it does feel hard. It is against the tide. But look, as someone said before, first and foremost, as Muslims, all our effort is for the sake of Allah. So our kind of effort will be rewarded by Allah, and that needs to remain our focus. Second thing is, we have to operate on the basis of principles. The ends do not justify the means. We have to be principled. We should never throw another Muslim under the bus. We should always seek, like you said, doesn't matter if we agree with their political outlook or not, we should always seek to be close to and united and supportive of each other. We don't have to agree with everything every organization does. And the third thing is, we've got to operate on the basis of kind of being positive and empowered and not disempowered, meaning we are equal. That's our starting position. I am equal to every single other citizen in this country. Okay, doesn't matter if they're the prime minister, and it doesn't matter, if they're owners of newspapers or anything else. They are equal to me, and the rights they have, I have, and it's the same. So my voice is important as part of this society, as whatever it's to do with foreign policy or to do with laws and legislations. I should have a say, and it's important that we carry on doing that.
I second that. Ameen. Jazakallah khair, brother, for coming on. Nice to see you. We haven't caught up in a while. We should after lockdown finishes have a kebab in East London or something. All right. All right, Azad. Assalamu alaikum, brother.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Okay, that was Azad Ali from Cage. And before I get on to the next guest, who I can see waiting, I won't keep you waiting long, Azu. I'm going to read out a few more comments. Okay, so Badriya says, I agree, wise up. Muslims should wise up. Muhammad says, with COVID-19, how do you think society is? Because big changes are happening globally, changing Islam in the UK. Dawood says, the Taliban are not the army of Mahdi. Okay, Dawood's having a discussion with somebody else on the thread. I won't get into that. Usman says, why do they invite you on the news in the first place? Isn't it to counter their propaganda? Well, I think when Muslims get invited onto the news. First of all, they're often invited on to be demonized, quite frankly, and they're put in a very hostile situation. They're not given much time to speak. They're interrupted constantly, while the other guests gets loads of time to speak, and the questions are soft. So it's not equality of arms. And when they choose Muslims who they just want to talk about ordinary issues, it's Muslims that aren't going to challenge their agenda, right? That aren't going to talk about Zionism or British foreign policy or the ills of racism and Islamophobia. It's people that are going to amplify their message. So I think that's unfortunately what's happening. And literally there is such a divide, kind of emerging between the mainstream Muslim community and wider society, because we're not reflected in the mainstream, and the wider community, doesn't know us like they should do. Roshan, why don't you do super chats on YouTube? You can make money for 5 pillars. Oh yeah, I'd like to make loads of money for 5 pillars. Ashraf said, why political Islam always gets silenced in the West? Where is liberty? Where's freedom of speech? And let me go back. Let me read out just 2 or 3 more. Do you know anything about gang stalking? No, I know about stalking, but not gang stalking. Sincere Advice says those whose mouths aren't safe from the ulama and mujahideen can expect humiliation. Matthew says, regarding PR, if you're only defending yourselves on your own website and social media, it will only be pre-existing sympathizers who see it. What cross-platform PR efforts are they making? Sincere Advice says, you have more hope in the disbelievers than those who have proven their sincerity to Allah and his religion and strove in its course. And final comment I'm going to read out, I might have missed out a few. This all happened after 9/11. I remember on the 10th of September, I was a normal British lad on the way to school. And on the 12th, I was called a blackjack and spat at. Downhill spiral since then. Yeah, I think many people will echo your comments. So whack 1, 2, 3. Okay, without further ado, let's get our second guest on. If I can get the technology right. Yes, Arzu Merrily from the Islamic Human Rights Commission. I believe, Arzu, you were one of the co-founders of the Islamic Human Rights Commission. Arzu, salam alaikum. How are you doing, sister?
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Yeah, it was a long time ago we set up IHRC. So,
yeah, about 20 years ago, was it, or something? Or?
I think it's going on for 24, something like that.
Yeah. So the Islamic Human Rights Commission, again, like Cage, grassroots British Muslim organization focusing on human rights. You're based in Preston Road, which is in the Wembley area. Yeah, tell me about how you've been targeted. I asked the same question to Azad. I'm not sure whether you heard about that. And he could have spoken for at least an hour on it. So give me the brief version, Arzu. How have you, as a mainstream grassroots British organization, effectively been marginalized and sidelined from British life?
Well, I mean, I don't think anything I'm going to say is going to be a surprise. We've been accused of being terrorist sympathizers. We've been accused of being anti-Semitic. We've been accused of dressing up an Islamist agenda behind the language and functionality of a human rights organization, which could mean, well, maybe we are just a human rights organization, or maybe that Islamic values have an appeal beyond, the stereotypes that you put, because actually the work we're doing, we're trying to be Islamic, and guess what, people like that. But, there's all this stuff. I think the best one was about a year and a bit ago. The Times actually sent a whole load of questions, Andrew Norfolk, in one they asked me and Masood, as you know, also a founder, also my dearly beloved husband, whether we were really married, and if not, why were we registered as living at the same address? It kind of tells you just about
question, isn't it?
Well, I mean, the thing is, if the answer had been, well, no, we're not married, which Nauzubillah, of course, that wasn't the answer. What is it they were expecting to get out of that?
Yeah. Will they ask non-Muslims whether they were married or not? I was researching for this show. I did come across a great quote by the Henry Jackson Society. I have to read it out. I'm going to ambush you a little bit here, Arzu. But the Henry Jackson Society, which is a right-wing think tank, not a fan of you, I think it's fair to say, or 5 Pillars, or Cage, and many other Muslim organizations. They said the Islamic Human Rights Commission is an anti-Semitic pro-terrorist. Senior figures have espoused support for violent jihad, expressed sympathy for convicted terrorists, and advocated for the extraction and eradication of Zionists. Campaigns have supported high-profile associates of Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, and Hezbollah. Your response, Azu?
They forgot Jeremy Corbyn. But, well, I don't need to respond to that. I mean, I think the key point is why is it that Henry Jackson Society has a platform and the power to make this kind of weird drivel, if you like, which all it does is force Muslim organizations to sit in a corner and go, well, no, what I meant was this. Actually, no, this. Oh, actually, what do you mean by that? Instead of partaking in mainstream society, why is it that Henry Jackson Society has the platform and a revolving door with government and government institutions or quangos to impact society, not just Muslims, wider society, and even in a transnational sense, because Henry Jackson obviously has got, transatlantic kind of connections.
I think they're government funded as well. They got government funding, if I'm not.
Yeah, I do believe they have, but they've had also private funding. They've had funding, I think, from the States. If not, definitely they have very good kind of transatlantic relationships with some of the similar organizations over there, think tanks that profoundly affect particularly foreign policy, but also domestic policy in the US, regardless of whether you're under Trump or Obama. How is it that they have that platform? We, as Muslim activists and organizations, have lost the ability to keep asking that question and holding them to account or trying to push.
Yeah, I think we're always on the back.
Like, why did you support, in our case, one that comes up both from Muslims and the Henry Jackson Society is, why did you campaign for Sheikh Umar Abdurrahman? Well, because his rights were violated. I didn't have to sign up.
This was the Egyptian cleric who was imprisoned in the United States. Yeah.
Well, he sadly passed away, I think, 3 years ago. But it's quite.
I think you raised an important point, because we seem to always be on the back foot defending ourselves. As you say, oh, I didn't really mean that, or it was taken out of context. Whereas we really should be on the front foot, right? Exposing them rather than defending ourselves against their attacks. I mean, Nazim as well, Nazim Ali, who, is, I'm not sure if he holds an official position with the IHRC, but he certainly volunteers for you guys a lot. And he was relentlessly targeted by certain Zionist organizations for effectively supporting the Palestinians and, directly targeting Zionists. He was taken to the High Court, called an anti-Semite. They tried to get him sacked from his job, and they failed several times. And they're still not giving up. I think they're still going for judicial review over this and that. And this is ultimately what committed Muslim activists have to put up with.
It's true. I think I just have to correct you. He's never been himself taken to the High Court or charged with anything or prosecuted with anything. And I think in that case, that's what's so important, that really they've been able to drag him and, the wider pro-Palestinian activism, etc., through the mud without actually being able to do anything to him in a substantial way using the law. And yet, because of the hoo-ha, everyone would think that something had happened to him. He'd been charged or prosecuted or etc. etc. They've in fact, a couple of small, well, not small, well-funded, but a couple of what should be marginal Zionist organizations actually going after the CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service. They're going after his professional body and this type of thing, right? So actually the implications of this are much wider. How is it that we're not really getting the pushback that we need to? I mean, if it had been anybody else being attacked via their professional body, I think there would be a hoo-ha about it. What kind
Zionism seems to be, and Palestine seems to be a red button issue for your enemies, basically, because I guess it's one of the calling cards of the IHRC is your unequivocal support for Palestine. You are, I think, one of the co-organizers of the Al-Quds March every year in London, and that has really made you a target, that support for Palestine and the kind of unequivocal calling out of Zionism that you guys do.
Well, the Muslim community has been through different stages the last 30, 40 years, which I am old enough to remember. And we've gone from being quite meek about Palestine to being very vociferous, and we're going right back down to being meek again. And I think in proportion to that, the attacks on IHRC increased because, alhamdulillah, for all our faults, we haven't kind of left that as a principle. It is a red line for us. And I think the fact that actually Muslim civil society, if that's what we're talking about, has become so quiet about Palestine, in fact, also then feeds into this. It's not that Muslim grassroots don't care about Palestine. We are just devoid of kind of a broad leadership that will stand up on these issues, and we know from the private conversations we have with other organizations that they have deliberately given up talking about Palestine because they've been offered, little crumbs of status in return from the government or from other agencies who've literally said to them, drop this, and you can be on our committee, you can be on our panel, we'll put you in a different stage of consultation, etc. And actually it doesn't work like that. The crumbs you get are not worth the kind of, frankly, betrayal of such an important issue, and with that, the Muslim community.
Let me take some comments, Arzu, before we continue with our conversation. So Sincere Advice says, any comments on BIMA, who actively call themselves democratic but try to represent popular Islamic opinion? Who is BIMA? Do you know? British Islamic. Sincere Advice, if you want to leave another comment explaining who that group is, then maybe we can answer your question. Khalil says, in the case of a Muslim civilian being imprisoned by the UK government under the name of terrorism charges, even if one hates ISIS, Al-Qaeda, etc., what can one do and who can one go to for support? Yeah, I know you've done some work, not just Cage, but you guys have done a lot of work on this as well. And it's not just, if people really were ISIS or Al-Qaeda, I don't think many Muslims would actually support them. But it's not those guys that are being locked up, is it, Arzu?
No, since really, actually, even before 9/11, we had new anti-terrorism laws in this country, and it's just been initially a combination of, in fact, the target community was the Algerian community in London for the first lot, and after 9/11, you had all sorts of people, fantasists, people who would, just say silly things or by email or in conversations with people who were having scores settled against them by being called a terrorist. We had one. In fact, I think there's a lot of cases Cage can talk about as well, where husband's been caught cheating, and the wife's phoned up the police and said he's a terrorist, and
got him locked up.
At the very least,
there was some incredible statistic I remember about the number of terrorism arrests compared to the number of terrorism convictions, and it was something like 1%, 1 or 2%. So I think a lot of these figures are being trumpeted for the sake of publicity. The security services and the police, they want to give the public the impression that they're doing something, that they're actually catching terrorists. But if you see what people are being convicted for, like Munir Faruqi in Manchester, for example, given something like 20 years for talking about what he might possibly do if he went to Afghanistan, and only saying that because undercover police officers put those words into his mouth. I mean, was he a real terrorist? No bombs, no weapons, no real plot, just somebody mouthing off in his basement at home, This is an important case that you raise, and there are a lot of cases like that. And I think the best way to talk about them is say, well, okay, you can see every day on social media now kind of far right or just right-wing commentary by any old individual saying similar things about what they're going to do to Muslims. Yeah, we get a lot of that, whether it's Quds Day or anything else. People posting quite openly the type of threats and whatnot, especially when there are sisters involved. Nothing happens to them, even if you complain. They don't even get banned from social media. Never mind being prosecuted for anything. Never mind going to prison for 20 years. Osman says, sorry,
we do not make that point. I think Muslims themselves have internalized this rhetoric about us having a problem within ourselves, that somehow we have to be treated differently. I think perhaps we don't even notice we're being treated differently. It's kind of got to that stage. And again, I don't blame individuals. I blame leadership.
Usman says, it's human rights really a platform that Muslims should be using to fight for Muslims? Are human rights really in accordance with Islam? Well, I think I remember reading your website once, and I think you had the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the UN, up there, but you don't quite go along with that, right? You have an Islamic version.
Never put that up there. I mean, human rights or anything else, yes, these are terms that we have to interrogate, and we have a big project about that going on.
I think you put it up there to question it, not as something to follow. Yeah.
I mean, as I said, we started 24 years ago, and this was like, if you like, a bridge into into sort of the human rights world. It's not the be all and end all, and it is an important question. Actually, I don't disagree with it, but no, we don't particularly.
Matthew says, if the IHRC had unlimited funding, what strategies would they implement to make their causes appealing to non-sympathizers? Arzu?
I think the thing that affects us the most is Islamophobia, right? Islamophobia is a kind of barrier between anybody, including Muslims, and things to do with Islam and Muslims. And so we have to tackle that. If we had unlimited funding, we could be looking at, and we've done a lot of research into this, kind of like 10 ways of countering Islamophobia. looking at setting up, whether it's artistic projects, media projects that actually break down the kind of narratives that people face. If we could, somehow engage people in institutions, because institutions are racist anyway, right? But people within them to push for internal change, and then also to organize as a community. You will find this on our website under, I can't remember the name of the project now, Counter-Islamophobia Toolkit, that's it. 10 strategies, but it needs funding, and it also needs some courage, frankly.
Yeah. Matthew's on a roll today. What lessons from the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam have IHRC considered or implemented to help with influencing the mainstream? I think I'll take a few more before I get you to comment on that. 786 Nath says, how long is it before Muslim organizations like Five Pillars and Cage are taken completely off the internet like Trump? What can we do to counter this? Well, we are under pressure. There's no doubt about that. And I've written articles about this. And we stay within the rules. We're very careful to stay within the rules because we know that, our enemies are probably looking for any opportunity to get us silenced. So we stay within the rules of Facebook and Twitter and YouTube. However, despite that, there is a constant stream of complaints to the people that regulate us and others as well. So we're under constant pressure. But quite frankly, we would just see this as our jihad. We see this as our struggle. It comes with the job, quite frankly. And Allah tests the best of us, and it's an honor to get attacked by your enemies, quite frankly. So Ashraf says, Robert Carter says, good chat. Robert. Sincere Vice says, the British Islamic Medical Authority. I'm not particularly familiar with that body. Are you, Arzu?
No, I'm sorry. My apologies.
Hizb ut-Tahrir should all be jailed, says Brad. Okay, Brad. All right, well, why? Why? For expressing a dissenting opinion, whether you agree with them or not. Have they called for violence? Have they done any acts of violence? I think that's the threshold. And if they haven't, then isn't this a secular country where freedom of speech prevails? Zaid says, how do you counter anti-Palestine propaganda when there are a majority of people forcing their views upon ourselves? So I think Zaid's saying that the majority of the country is like, I'm not sure if they are, but any comment on that? I'm not exactly sure what he means, to be honest.
I don't know that the majority of people are anti-Palestinian.
I don't think they are. I just think that the people in power are. But exactly. if you did a poll of national opinion, I think it might be quite mixed. Khalid says Muslims spend around 300 per head or 100 million per Ramadan. We need to funnel that in the right way. Well, this is something I've been talking about, Arzu, is that we need to get a bit more savvy about how we spend our money, because we're very generous, but we tend to give it to humanitarian causes, which is great, and we must continue doing that. I do that myself. But I think we also need to not forget about the political causes, because ultimately, the think tanks, the media, the human rights organizations, they're the ones that think long term and try to address problems long term rather than short term. Hassan says, what do you think about the Taliban continue to attack? A lot. You guys are having a discussion on the Taliban, which is fine, but it's not the subject of this show. So I think I'm going to, please forgive me, I'm going to ignore those comments. UK Muslim community suffers from a lack of leadership. So what are some solutions to establish mainstream leadership, not in the form of social media celebrities and the Muslim organization model? What do you think of our leaders, Arzu?
I think we have a crisis.
Don't sit on the fence.
We have a crisis of leadership, okay? Everyone right now is very scared in the United Kingdom because of the kind of anti-terror laws and regime we have. And I don't blame any ordinary person. It is a scary time. You can trip up on anything, and the rules keep changing, right? There is no really set, defined thing as to what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. And it keeps, being, we keep being squashed into a smaller and smaller space. But if you're going to put yourself in a leadership position, I say this to myself first as much as anybody else, you have to have a bit of courage. It is scary, right? But if that's what you're saying, I am going to lead, or I am somehow, in a position of authority, then, I'm sorry, you've got to stand up.
You've got to be a lion, not a mouse. That's the way I always put it. Arzu, getting to the end of our discussion now, any kind of final thoughts about the situation we're in and how we can get out of it? Because we are marginalized, aren't we? And we literally I sometimes get a feeling that we're talking amongst ourselves. And before I say that, I want to say a few things about our leaders, because I'm not going to sit on the fence. I think they're rubbish. I think they're a shower. They are rubbish, and they don't deserve to be leaders. And in a way, I kind of think, I wish there was one person we could unite around and who could show us the way, in our community. But there isn't. If I ask anybody who should be the Muslim community leader, no one could think of one figure, I don't think. And there really is a dearth of leadership. I think we have talented people in different areas, but leadership really isn't one of them. And I think one of the traits of a leader really is, apart from having not losing your dressing room, having the consensus of a wide amount of people, is also courage, And we don't really have anyone like that in the community. That's my own personal opinion. But getting your final thoughts now, we're marginalized. How do we get out of this rut? Is it just going to get worse and worse and worse? And soon we'll be like the French Muslims, where they're shutting down our organizations. And then we're thinking of literally leaving the country. Is that what awaits us, Arzu?
It's not that far away. And actually, I think a lot of organizations have already folded or become irrelevant. The British are more nuanced and sophisticated than the French, but they are ultimately operating the same kind of agendas, right? So those pressures have kind of taken the fangs out of the Muslim community. But I don't think we should have doom and gloom. Someone asked about what has IHRC done vis-a-vis the example of the Prophet. Maybe you should ask some of the shaykh we work with. I don't think I feel qualified to talk about that. But on a personal level, the Prophet didn't compromise what he was saying for the sake of the wider community or for any political reason, etc., etc. That doesn't mean he didn't have different ways of speaking to different sections of society, but he didn't compromise. And that's a message to leaders or proto-leaders. We keep every generation investing in education, a secular education, thinking this is going to create a leadership. It's not. It's just creating Muslim apparatchiks to operate. It used to be civil servants, now it's mayors. Maybe we might get a PM. I don't know. It's no use if the rest of society and institutions you're working in are unjust, not just because they are racist against Muslims or other groups, but just generally on every single level. So Muslim leadership needs to stand up to that. There aren't easy solutions, but, Muslim grassroots, don't lose hope and don't lose faith. Okay. That's really
all right.
what to do.
On that note, Arzu, I'll say goodbye. Jazakallah khair for coming on today. Okay, assalamu alaikum. Okay, that was Arzu Merali from the Islamic Human Rights Commission. We're getting towards the end of the show now. I'll do my outro in a few minutes, but let me read some comments from you guys that I haven't read out so far. Usman says, real talk, 9/11 was an inside joke. 2 planes, but 3 towers went down. I'm not sure. Let's do a show on 9/11. I'll do a spectacular show on 9/11. I promise you guys that. Hassan Ahmed, what do you think about the Taliban continue to attack? Masoom says, UK Muslim community suffers from a lack of leadership. Absolutely. So what are some solutions to establish mainstream leadership, not in the form of social media celebrities and the Muslim organization model? I think I've read this comment out before. Our leaders now are like YouTube celebrities, aren't they? And people without any qualifications whatsoever. But just because they've got the patter, they become very popular. I mean, that's the state of our community at the moment. There's no winner but Allah, says Akshaf. 7886 Nath says, why don't all the Muslim organizations get together and have a discussion about how to help the public? Well, Muslim organizations, we do collaborate with each other, or we do communicate with each other. But I have to say, perhaps because of the political differences since the Arab Spring, to a certain extent, differences over what's going on in the Middle East, we haven't collaborated as much as we have in the past. I think that's a shame, because ultimately we're a weak minority in this country to a certain extent, and we need to have those numbers defending each other, not just behind the scenes, but publicly. And we're not doing either at the moment, I don't think. Fuad says, come on, Roshan, answer the questions linked to Iran. Or ours is gone now. Fuad, Fuad, I've given you enough airtime. I've given you loads of airtime today. And Fuad's like, what's your real name, Fuad? Tell me your real name. Peter. Usman says, I got followed home afterward by an agent. He snapped a pic of me as well. Should I be worried? Well, I can't really comment on that. But all I do know is that Muslim leaders in particular will be monitored by the security services. There's no doubt about that. I did a documentary a few years ago about exactly this. So it's not conspiracy theory. It is fact. They will seek to disrupt. Brad, don't know. I'm not interested in what you have to say, Brad. Nad says, Brad followed by Nad. The Muslim community in the UK need economic power. By uplifting ourselves and not relying on the state, we will be in a more powerful position to make a difference in the political sphere. Money is power. Yeah, I do think we have to be self-sufficient, not rely on handouts. I mean, we are kind of, not that we get them anyway, but we are entitled to apply for government money and government funding, et cetera, But whenever we do, we get an article in the right-wing media putting pressure on that organization, and then suddenly we haven't got the money anymore. But the same yardstick isn't applied to non-Muslim organizations, which is a total disgrace. But I do think generally that the Muslim community needs to become self-sufficient, because self-sufficiency means independence. It means that we can say what we want to say. And if we can, build a powerful media, build powerful charities, civil society organizations, political organizations, even, financial organizations, ultimately, if we do that, then we won't have to rely on the mainstream to survive. A few more comments before I do my outro. Abdallah says, more revivalist organizations should all join hands. No time for idealism. And finally, Badria says, yes, you're right. Roshan, thank you. I'm not sure what that's referring to, but I'm right. Of course I'm right. Okay, let me do my outro now. Sorry, I nearly knocked the table over there in my excitement. So, at 5 Pillars, we've had a taste of this marginalization. We've been censored on social media. Facebook has even given us warnings when I assure you we did not deserve them. And there's no right of reply. There's no fair, kind of appeal process. It's judge, jury, and executioner, quite frankly. We've had complaints to our regulator in press. I think most of them have been absolutely spurious complaints there to ultimately waste our time. And none of those complaints have been upheld. And inshallah, none of them will be upheld because we follow the laws of this country. And we follow the rules of responsible journalism as well. We used to get invited on the mainstream media a lot, myself and Dilly Hussain, when we started 5 Pillars. We were always on the BBC, ITV, Channel 4 News. Literally every week we'd get a phone call, at least. We have not been invited back for several years now. And I tell you what, it's not because we did a bad job. I think it's because we did a too good a job, quite frankly. We held people to account far too efficiently. What they want is dumb Muslims on their programs, Muslims who can't answer back, Muslims who will be submissive. That's the kind of Muslims they want on the BBC, Channel 4, ITV, etc., etc. So I consider this to be part of my jihad, quite frankly. Part of my struggle. It's a pleasure, it's an honor to be attacked by our enemies. It means we're doing something right. It means we're making waves. It means that we are having an effect. And that's what we want to do as a media organization. But ultimately, we're part of a wider society here. And we want to engage with that society constructively and within the realms of the law. But ultimately, Muslims are being pushed to the margins. And we're talking amongst ourselves. That is not a recipe for communal harmony. That's a recipe, perhaps even for extremism, and they're claiming to combat extremism, but they're not engaging with grassroots Muslim organizations, which can help them probably solve the problem. Instead of doing that, they're demonizing them. And the Muslim community, by and large, isn't going with the mainstream. It's sticking with its community as it should. So ultimately, what I say to you, brothers and sisters, is keep supporting Muslim platforms. I'm not going to sit here and beg for money. I'm very bad at doing that. I want you guys to support Muslim. If you believe in their mission, if you believe they're doing good work, I want you to support British Muslim media organizations, human rights organizations, advocacy organizations, charities, financial institutions, whatever that is, because ultimately we need an independent, self-sufficient Muslim community that can act as a lobby, and perhaps then the mainstream, instead of attacking us, will be adopting part of our agenda. All right, a few more comments coming in here. Let me read them before. I want to read out as many comments as I can, to be honest. I hate not reading out comments. Badria says the best to lead us is the most knowledgeable in the deen and the best in character. Baju says maybe because you're gaining influence. that we're being attacked. That's what I think. Hassan says, Majid Nawaz and LBC, we can do better than that, surely. LBC radio station, what a disgrace. The epitome of white supremacy on the radio. Literally, 19 out of their 20 presenters are white, okay? They're based in London, the most multicultural city in the whole world. They are based in London. 1 in 10 Londoners is a Muslim. The majority of Londoners are ethnic minorities. LBC, white supremacy, that's what it is. 19 out of 20 of their presenters are white people. And guess who the 20th is? Majid Nawaz, a brown person who spends a lot of his time attacking Muslims. CG says that's true. Mainstream media don't want Muslims like Dili, Hussein and Roshan on TV because they can challenge their worldview. Rehan says they should be coming to Muslim platforms, not the other way around. Khalid says, please give a link to donate to 5 Pillars. You can find it on our website, brothers and sisters. How many of us pray for great leadership in London, UK? Please say dua, Brother Roshan. Ameen. Inshallah, I will. Waqar says, really appreciate the fact that you read out the comments. Thank you so much, Roshan. The comments are the best part of the show. The comments are not me, the guests. The comments are the best part of the show. That's what I think anyway. Abdullah says, even if it is at the cost of losing name and identity of one's own group, talk about humility and sacrifice. And 2 more comments. Matthew says, have you considered including the names of actual Islamophobes to reach out to more viewers? I don't want to get sued. No. I can name names, but maybe another time because the show's coming to the end. Mina says, always enjoy listening to 5 Pillars. Jazakallah khair. Okay, so I'm going to wrap up the show now. As I said, I'm going to try and do this show bi-weekly. That's my promise to you. But I might change my mind if there's a burning issue, and we might go live on any day whatsoever. But for the moment, thank you, brothers and sisters, for watching The Big Picture with me, Roshan Mohammed Salih. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.